Welcome back. Now, funding for embattled Eskom and other struggling SOEs, public sector wage bill, funding for social relief grants, likely increases of fuel and the road accident levies. These are among a litany of issues the finance minister is expected to shed the light on during the budget speech next week. Enoch Godongwana will deliver his speech on Wednesday afternoon. Let's bring in Econometrix Chief Economist, Dr. Azar Jammine. Thank you so much for your time, Doctor. We do appreciate it. As you heard in my introduction, there are many issues, but I think top of everybody's mind is the issue of Eskom. There have already been some kind of insinuations that government is going to find a way to deal with that 400 billion rand debt. What do you think is going to come out of the budget speech, especially linked to Eskom?
With regard to Eskom and possibly some other SOEs, the government has made it clear that it might well shift some of the debt that they have onto its own balance sheet. What this implies in practice, I suppose, for the man in the street is not a huge amount because at the moment Eskom is having to try and fund itself and fund the repayment of its debt through high electricity tariffs. If that is now shifted to the government, then what it does mean is that although you may not need to have as high rate of increase in electricity tariffs to help Eskom fund its way, the government will now need to source the extra money from taxpayers to pay the interest on the debt that it will need to do. The idea is that Eskom will feel less constrained in its ability to actually just manage its operations without having to worry quite as much about having to just pay the interest on its debt as much as before. That is the difference between the two.
I want us to maybe speak about the increase of taxes, because we might see the finance minister increasing this, but if you just look at the cost of living and how people are already struggling, does the minister have room to move when it comes to the increase of taxes? Do you think that that's a probability?
I don't think he has too much room to move. I think the government has already acknowledged that it has gone about as far as it can in terms of raising personal taxes. And other forms of taxes are likely to increase in line with inflation. Here I'm thinking of fuel levies and RAF levies and etc. The corporate tax rate is set to come down by 1%, ironically, because that was stated in last year's budget. Not a big thing. No, the government has to try and find other ways of funding itself, and that means reprioritizing its expenditure, moving expenditure from one area where it may not be as badly needed as towards another area. That is going to be the primary driver. And the government is only too aware that it has had the blessing in the last 2 years of a bonanza in terms of more government revenue accruing than previously anticipated, emanating from a surge in commodity prices that has resulted in a huge increase in the profits of mining companies who've then been able to pay more tax. But that is drawing to a close. Certainly SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter alluded to this in a speech a couple of weeks ago.
I want us to move over to the possibility of the social distress relief grant possibly being increased. We do know it has been extended, and the President, during his State of the Nation address, said that the Finance Minister will make further announcements this week. But it almost seems as though they could possibly be looking at increasing this. Do you think that that's possible, and do you think that's a good idea?
I think the extension of the social relief grant is almost certainty. I think it was stated as such in the State of the Nation address by President Ramaphosa. Whether they will increase it from 350 rand per month to something like 400 rand per month, I think is quite possible. The amounts involved are big, but they're not huge, and so I think the government will go ahead with this. It was stated by the Minister of Social Protection last week that it would cost about 2.7 billion rand per month to extend this, which amounts to around 33 billion rand per year. And if they were to raise it, say, to 400 rand a month, that would go up to more like 40 billion rand for the whole year. That is a lot of money, but I suppose that it's kind of, the government has no option but to go with that. The same with the public servant wages that are going to have to rise by around 25 to 30 billion rand a year in their budgets. And this is the dilemma that the government is facing. It has no opportunity to raise taxes further, but has these additional expenditures. So we may well end up with a slight increase in the budget deficit for the next few years.
And definitely when you look at economic growth, Dr. Azar, when you look at economic growth, when you look at what's happening globally, it doesn't really look all that great, especially when you consider how many loans South Africa has taken out.
This is probably the biggest concern, is that and we won't know the answer even after the budget speech, how reliable government's economic growth forecasts will be. Because many analysts are looking at the economy growing by 1 to 1.5% this year. But the Reserve Bank and a couple of other private analysts like ourselves are saying, in the face of this intensified load shedding prospect, we'll be lucky to get any growth whatsoever. You mentioned the overseas loans. I don't think one should exaggerate the weight that they will place on the South African government. In fact, they have been a blessing in a way, because they come at a very low interest rate. So even though we're taking on those loans, the amount of interest we pay on them is very low, and that's been the big attraction in taking them on. But the bigger concern is that economic growth may not turn out to be as great as the government will project, and that as a consequence, the revenue projections may turn out to be overly optimistic. And in a way, Kisvet is almost warning against that at the moment. So there's no room for complacency, and I think we're going to have further austerity without a doubt.
That's very worrying, but we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of the budget speech next week, Wednesday. Thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate it. That was Econometrix Chief Economist, Dr. Azar Jammine.